If it's embedded in there.
Yeah, and if it's embedded, if it's a piece of hardware, and the hardware, you can't really patch hardware.
No.
So,
Go on.
to start?
Sorry.
All right, cool. All right, well, thanks everybody for attending. I hope you appreciate this talk. My name's Ben Schmerler. I'll get into who I am in a minute, but this presentation is about security theater, and I'm going to give a specific example of something that happened outside of DEF CON a couple years ago, and sort of talk about what happened, why it's bad, and what you can do about it. And hopefully we'll have, it'll be enjoyable too. So who am I? I'm Ben. I work with customers to figure out security testing methodologies at independent security evaluators where I work. We're a team of ethical hackers who hack things like web applications, IoT devices, corporate networks, business processes, really anything that has an asset that needs protecting, we hack it, and I'm basically on the first line where I talk to people, find out what they're trying to protect, and come up with a methodology for it. ISC also runs the IoT Village, so I don't know if anyone's been to B-Sides or DEF CON or RSA, but we bring this exhibit all over. If you're at DEF CON in August, make sure to come see me. Maybe I'll have some t-shirts, hopefully, if they don't run out. And we run all sorts of exhibits and try to teach people how to hack and do things securely. One of the core philosophies at ISC in the Village is that we embrace what I would call the hacker mindset. And we don't want people to just take things for granted. We want people to think outside the box. You know, being a hacker means understanding how a system works and trying to circumvent that system. And you can apply this, of course, in a cybersecurity perspective, but we can apply this to all sorts of things, like how we do our jobs and how we run our homes and things like that. You know, embracing that hacker mindset can often lead to really powerful outcomes. So what is security theater? Well, I went ahead and I asked an AI, I said, please create a picture of me of the security theater. And so we have these nice people outside the security theater. For some reason, this theater happens to serve popcorn outside the movie theater. I'm not quite really sure why that is. But in reality, security theater I would just call fake security. It's the beware of dog sign. I don't know if anyone ever dealt with anyone who would just buy the beware of dog sign and then put it outside their house, but they didn't actually have a dog, or the alarm system sign, or they just put up the sign that they have an alarm system, but they don't actually have it. It's really generally based on feelings rather than actual assessment. So we're not really talking about outcomes or about achieving something. It's that somebody has some kind of vibe that we should do this thing because it's good for security. These practices are often stale or outdated, and the controls don't really match the asset. You know, the previous speaker was talking about compliance and security controls, and one of the interesting things about compliance is it's basically this prescriptive list of checks, and many of these controls are very valuable. But if they don't apply to what you're doing, or they don't fit the asset you're trying to protect, then the control is kind of whatever. So all of this stuff can be security theater, and I'm sure there's other ideas as well. Let me give a little bit of background about the event. So in 2024, it was DEF CON 32, and it was in Las Vegas, Nevada. They had changed their venues. So in the past, it was at the Caesars Link, and some stuff happened. There was a bomb threat one year. There was the MGM hack, which you may have heard of, and some other stuff that kind of freaked out the folks at Caesars, and they kicked the DEF CON people out. So not DEF CON's fault and not the organizer's fault, but just this weird vibe stuff. So they moved to Las Vegas Convention Center, which is, if you're familiar with Vegas, you're Fontainebleau and Resorts World and all that other stuff. And it was the first year they did it. And like most conferences, probably like this conference, when you register with your hotel, make sure to use the code so you can get on the room block. And so we did. And when we go to DEF CON, we usually bring about a dozen people flown over from all over the country to help run the village with us. And we had a whole bunch of rooms. And when we got there, and maybe you saw this on the internet because it kind of got a little bit of buzz right around the time, there were these letters that were dropped in everyone's rooms when you got there. I have a copy at home. I could have brought it, I guess I didn't. maybe it's a little small to see, but it says, thanks for coming to Hilton Resorts World, Las Vegas. Thanks for coming. As you may or may not know, even though you're registered for DEF CON, they call it a well-known hacking convention. They don't tell you what the convention is. It's going to be in Las Vegas during the stay. They care so much about safety that they're going to do brief visual and what they call non-intrusive room inspections. So they're just going to go into people's rooms and look for stuff. If you have one of those little privacy signs that says "Do not enter," you might as well throw it in the garbage because they don't care. The privacy signs don't matter; they'll just walk in anyway. And you can ask them questions or whatever, and it's signed by this guy, Prescott. Later, we were able to find some documentation of the stuff that they were searching for. People weren't really pleased about this. And what were they looking for? So, stuff is what they were looking for. On their sheets, this is one of the sheets, they had USB drives, flash drives, which are whatever. I mean, I'm sure there are thousands of them in this building right now. Things like soldering irons, screwdrivers, breadboards, flipper zeros, wireless routers, basically stuff that has flashing lights on it and is associated with stereotypical hacker stuff. Just electronics. There's a lot of problems with this, as this stuff is all very performative, and fundamentally, the most likely thing to hack someone is probably this. A laptop, which anybody has, or something circumspect, like an app on a phone, or something that you just can't visually see. So it was kind of a weird search. We found the instructions that were given to staff. So the people who were doing the room checks were like security, and when I say security, I don't mean like cybersecurity people, but like enforcer type security people, the bouncer types. And they would give them instructions that at 9 a.m. they would just go to all the rooms, particularly in the DEF CON block, and it was 1,000 rooms that they were searching for the actual security team. But then they also made the housekeeping staff do searches. So if you were going to make somebody's bed or replace their towels, now the housekeeper was also going to check on stuff in rooms. And again, it didn't matter if you put the signs up, it didn't matter if you said "Do not disturb," they were going to come in. They also talk about things like, they tell people, what's very funny about this letter to me also is that they mention that they have a group chat with security, IT, hotel, on Microsoft Teams, but they also tell people to put their phones in airplane mode. Well, there's kind of a problem with this because you can't really chat on Microsoft Teams if the phone is in airplane mode because it doesn't talk on any kind of communications. So they didn't really think this through very well. This came up on 404 Media after the event. Unsurprisingly, when you go to a bunch of nerdy hacker types, security people, and you say you're going to search rooms and people don't like it, people are going to do some stuff to troll. And one person apparently mounted a small camera in their room, and they caught some of the security people doing their searches. I think it's kind of funny too, because you can even see they don't really know what they're looking for. These are just random security people. My colleague Ted Harrington, who, if you're around after the event, I could give you a book that he wrote called Hackable. They walked in on him, and he was just sort of sitting there. I think he was getting out of the shower. He was there with his girlfriend. And that was pretty awkward. Fortunately, he wasn't in too much of a compromising position. But again, they were just walking in on people to do these searches. And what were they even really doing? They were just walking around and looking for things that they might consider suspicious. Nothing really concrete. Anyway, this was out there. And there's probably other pictures and things that are out on the internet too if you want to do some Googling. There are a lot of problems with this policy, and I'm just going to start with problems with execution. This is kind of an aimless and vague search. So again, they're looking at things like USB drives, screwdrivers, soldering irons. I don't know if anyone attended Matt Brown's talk yesterday, but a few years ago, Matt and I were splitting a hotel room for DEF CON, and we had a soldering iron in the room because we were soldering things onto our badges, things called SAOs, if you're familiar with them. And we weren't doing anything, we were just having fun. We were just playing with a soldering iron. I mean, all a soldering iron does is wire something to another. It's not particularly sophisticated. They had different policies for registered blocks. So, as you may have seen from that letter, they were telling the security staff to look at the DEF CON block, and then housekeeping to look at a different one. Well, if I was really trying to do something, maybe I wouldn't register in the DEF CON block, maybe I would register in another block, and maybe I'd give up the little discount. But if I'm trying to commit crime, I don't care about the discount code. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. They were only looking for like weird electronics and gadgets. So I said the most likely hacking tool that most people have is just a regular laptop. And those things are not inherently not suspicious. I mean, it's not like TSA when you fly through the fly there is checking every laptop for hacking tools. Of course they're not. It's just a laptop. So they're looking for these things, and there's really nothing that they can do with them. There's the wrong people doing the search. Now, I don't mean to demean the security staff of Hilton or the housekeepers, but I don't think these people are really qualified to be able to look for actual cyber criminality. They don't know what they're looking for. They don't really understand what the actual signs of an incident might be. And you're putting them in a very difficult position. They're trained for one thing, and you're having them do something else. And inherently, that's just a bad look. What happens if they find a bunch of things in the picture? They go into someone's room and they see like a pineapple, or they see a bunch of laptops opened up, or a Flipper Zero, or a bunch of USB sticks or breadboards. So what do? Do you kick the person out of the hotel for having a USB drive, for having a wireless router? Well, maybe you just have it. Maybe you're a security researcher. Maybe you're going to be doing a talk at DEF CON, the thing you registered to go to. These things are legal to have, anyone's allowed to have them, and they have lots of functions. So the security people can't really do anything about this. There's a big question of whether DEF CON itself is actually a riskier time for the hotel and the people there. Is there something about DEF CON that makes things dangerous for guests? I don't really think so. DEF CON itself is an educational conference for the most part. They have their own code of ethics and conduct. They have gone after people who have done things that are unethical in the past. And as the conference has grown over the years, I think that these things have become even more serious, and the ethics have become more of a strict standard. So I don't really think it's a riskier time. In fact, it's probably more dangerous when people have their defenses down and just think, oh, I'm just here for a trip to gamble or something like that. And maybe most importantly, this is a very easily socially engineered policy. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later in the presentation. There's also the matter of trust and privacy. So, like, there's the execution of security, but then there's also how the guests at the hotel and other people are treated here. If you have no right to privacy in your hotel room, that's not really a great way to stay as a guest. I don't think it's good for your business. And again, you could walk in on someone in a very compromising position. I don't know anyone specifically besides Ted who had a little bit of that, but it was probably a lot worse for certain people. This policy was not communicated in advance. We found out when we arrived. And so we don't really have an opportunity to question it, to ask to point out why it's bad, or even change our hotels if we were really uncomfortable with it. I mean, we went along with this, and we're, to be completely transparent, we'll be at this hotel again. But nothing was really communicated to us, and it's kind of unfair to arrive on site and find this unreasonable measure being put in place. There's huge potential for damage of guest property or maybe even violence. If you walked in on the wrong person and they're in a bad mood, maybe they've been drinking or something like that, maybe the person doing the search does something untoward or something like that. What if somebody gets in a fight? What if somebody, anything could happen. I don't want to bring up too many lurid examples. It also opens up the door to employee abuse. So, again, the staff at the Hilton, they're probably really good people, but when you're giving all of these people the rights to search everyone's room, well, what are they going to do with it? Are they going to, maybe take some money from guests or mess with somebody's laptop or device or something? There's no oversight of what the staff is doing. So there's really no transparency or audit trail for what's going on with this stuff. I think that this also gives the impression that the hotel was unprepared to deal with security challenges. All these problems with security, cybersecurity or otherwise, social engineering, etc., all of these things existed before DEF CON and they existed after DEF CON. Things like people snooping on Wi-Fi or stealing credentials or pretexting or any of these things, they always existed. And so all of a sudden, now that the conference is in town, now we have to ramp up our security. The hotel should always be secure. In fact, the security of the hotel and a casino is really secure when it comes to the games. The pit bosses are all over the games. They really care about that stuff. They should probably take a similar approach to standard cybersecurity practices. And then finally, it's kind of ridiculous to me that they would invite us to come to DEF CON, and they would give us a room block, and they're like, hey, come here, spend all this money with us. DEF CON, great, we really want you to be here. And then as soon as you arrive, you're treated with suspicion. We're their guests, we're paying them money. They knew we were coming, and they knew what we were coming for. And then all of a sudden, we're subject to suspicion. I just think that that's a bad look and kind of silly. The biggest problem is that this is all performative. So similar to the security theater thing, I asked an AI to show me someone performing security, and this is what it outputs. So this is a guy on stage performing security. You can see he's doing some kind of bit. I don't really understand, but I thought it was a funny picture. This is maybe a little small to see, but it gives a false sense of security to other hotel guests. So imagine if you're an average person, maybe you're not in tune with cybersecurity, maybe you don't really know that much about social engineering, and you see this policy and you say, oh, you know what? I really am relieved. I didn't know DEF CON was happening right now. Thank goodness the hotel is doing these searches. Now I don't really have to worry about security at all. Well, a smart maybe an unethical person, but a smart person could abuse this kind of dropping of defenses and say, well, because the hotel is all secure, I'm going to start trying to skim somebody's information or socially engineer them or something like that. I think it's a really unrealistic view of security and unethical hackers. So again, we're getting back to these stereotypes of hackers in their little closets with all the glowy lights and keyboards and hackering gear, but most hacks happen with typical stuff, things that aren't necessarily showy, and people don't grasp that. There's another thing about the hacker mindset, which is that when you tell somebody that you have this policy you're going to do searches, a lot of hackers tend to be like, oh yeah, you're challenging me? You think you can search me? Okay, I'm going to game you. And those people who posted the images on 404 Media with the camera in their room, they considered it a challenge. They didn't go out there with the intent of recording stuff in their room, but because you told them that you were going to do this stupid search, therefore they're going to start gaming it a little bit. The unethical hacker knows that this approach is wrong and would use it for pretexting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment, but what are some things that some unethical people could do as a result of this? So anyway, on the last day that we were at the event, we all were hanging out at this little tiki bar at the Hilton and laughing about this policy. And we decided to sort of talk together, well, what if we were hacking the search? What if we wanted to go around this? What are some of the stuff we did? And we relied on key hacker Snake from The Simpsons, who was the vault inspector. And he asked people famously, hey, vault inspector, oh, here you go, let me take a look at your wallet. And Homer, hey, that's not the vault inspector. So there's a lot of things that we could do. First is, what's to stop anybody from being a fake security inspector? Could I put on a red polo shirt like the people at the Hilton and maybe a pair of khakis and stuff and knock on somebody's door and say, yeah, room search happening, oh yeah, the letter said you're doing a room search, let me let you right in. And then I come in and I do whatever I want. There's not that much stopping it. There's no new credentialing. You've already given people the expectation that these searches can happen, and now an unethical person could take advantage of that. I mentioned before there could be abuse from employees. Again, I'm not trying to knock the people who work here, the workers, the staff, but they're not here to do this stuff. And we don't know their credentials or how they're going to do it or whether they even care about doing it the right way. And so there's a huge potential for abuse and no way to track it. We can do things like misdirections. So when you're in a hotel, you can usually use the phone to call other rooms, just dial the room number. And you can say, excuse me, I need you to come to the front desk. We have a result from your room search. And then while they're doing that, someone else goes to their room and starts to take advantage or tracks them or something like that. You could also do a phone call and just call them up and say, hey, you know, we were doing a room search and I just need you to verify what's the name of your PC or what's the application you're using for this, or just ask people for information pretending to be the hotel or pretending to be security staff and ask people for information. And again, because they have the expectation that they're being searched, they may volunteer information that they might not otherwise volunteer, much like people who text you scams or do voicemail phishing or something like that. And really, any attack that involves a run-of-the-mill, non-suspicious device, while they're all focused on searching rooms and things like that, maybe somebody's just sitting there with their laptop trying to hack the Wi-Fi. I mean, I think that's totally possible. Their efforts or their energy is all being spent in one place. All of these people, all this mobility, just to look at rooms and look for physical devices, as opposed to actually looking for security incidents. So just a few consequences of this. You know, first, they didn't catch anybody. They didn't find anything. Not a surprise, right? Like, what were they to find? What was going to happen? I think it left a lot of bad vibes. When I was walking around the event in Vegas, this was what people were talking about. Oh, did you hear what they're doing at the Hilton, doing these room searches? Yeah, I took all my stuff out of the room. I'm carrying it around now because I don't want them finding this stuff. People were kind of bitter. A lot of people said, I'm not going to stay at this hotel again. That costs the hotel business. I just think that's not good in general. An average person is going to let down their defenses and not really look for social engineering. So as I mentioned, all those things that I went through in the previous slide about pretexting and pretending like you're doing the searches and stuff like that, most people are going to drop those defenses because the hotel has given them a false sense of security. And now a bunch of unethical hackers will have an immature target. They're going to look at the Hilton and they're going to say, you know what, these people don't know what they're doing, and now I think this hotel is a low-hanging fruit. And I'm not going to focus on Circus or Fontainebleau or whatever, these other hotels. I'm going to focus on Hilton because they don't have their act together. So they've actually drawn a bigger target on their back as a result of this, in my opinion. So there's a better way to do this stuff. You know, if you ever want to get into the physical security space or do this kinds of searches, there are decent ways to do these kinds of things, or at least do them in a reasonable way. The first thing is to communicate. You know, if they were going to do these searches, they could have told everybody in advance. Or they could have consulted with somebody or asked the organizers of DEF CON, hey, what do you recommend for these people who are coming into town so we make sure that the hotel's not hacked because of this stuff? And I'm sure they could have collaborated with DEF CON people or the other guests. Instead, they just sort of surprised everybody about this. They could set standards like equipment or standards and things. Maybe they could have told people, hey, listen, we're just not allowing people to bring in their own Wi-Fi devices into the hotel, or you have to tell us in advance if you're bringing electronics that are unusual for a typical hotel guest. They could have said, this is something we're doing, and as a result, we'd like you to communicate with us in advance and have a little bit of a back and forth. I think in general, they should be, if you don't know what you're doing with security, or if you don't have a policy, or you're not sure what your risks are, the best thing you can do is consult with experts. So again, they could have talked to anybody. They could have talked to the DEF CON organizers, cybersecurity consultants like myself, whatever, and said, this is something we're concerned about. What is a reasonable approach? They didn't do that. Instead, they just decided to do these random searches. One thing that I thought was really striking is in all those letters, they didn't give any advice to their stakeholders. They didn't tell the guests, hey, DEF CON is in town, here's a few things you should do. Nothing on that letter told them about what threats to look for, what are the signs of being socially engineered, what will the staff ask them, and what will they never ask them. It doesn't even say what the standards are of the people doing the search, who they are, how they're identified, anything like that. They just drop this search. And so the average person doesn't really know how to defend themselves. You know, we all have responsibilities for our security. And the hotel didn't empower anyone to take any personal responsibility for this stuff. I thought that was really bad. And finally, one thing that I think pretty much anyone should do if they're trying to protect something is talk about what you do. You know, a lot of people are kind of buttoned up about security. I wrote a blog about this, which was people are very reluctant to talk about what they do in order to protect either their data or their customers' data or things like that. But most security controls don't need to be a secret. It doesn't need to be a secret to say, hey, this is how we protect our Wi-Fi. This is how we log data. These are the things we track. This is how often we perform penetration tests, so on and so forth. These are not secrets. These are practices and disciplines. And it can let people know where they can be comfortable, maybe where they should be a little bit more sensitive to stuff. They didn't do any of that. Instead, they just said, we're doing a bunch of searches. I thought that was a real disservice. So anyway, just to sort of recap some of the stuff I went over, and of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. You know, security theater is what happened at Resorts World, and I think it legitimately made security worse for their guests, both at their time, at the event, and also afterwards. It gave them a false sense of security, it endeared them to bad practices, and we can do so much better. As most people know who are responsible for security, resources are very limited. There's only so much we can do. There's only so much money we can spend. There's only so much time we can invest, so many things we can test, so on and so forth. And so when you create a search policy that says we're going to leverage all of these people and all of this time to invest in this thing that is entirely performative, something else is being sacrificed for that. I don't know, maybe nothing actually happened for the Hilton for this particular event, but they're running the risk that something bad does happen when they misallocate resources towards bad security practices. Searches certainly can be useful, like let's say they wanted to look for firearms or weapons or whatever. I mean, there's a purpose to do searches, but they really need to be thoughtfulness and intentionality, otherwise this is all very easily abused. Those people who were doing the searches, I really felt sorry for them in some ways because they didn't know what they were looking for. And because they didn't know what they were looking for, they didn't find anything. And instead, they could have just had a little bit more of a thoughtful policy. What you really want out of any security policy, whether it's a search policy at the Hilton or an internal policy at a small business or an enterprise or whatever, is you want buy-in from the stakeholders. You don't want people mocking security. You want people to believe in security. I'm sure most people have probably, if you're in security, you've experienced people complaining about things like MFA. Oh, it's so annoying, I gotta check my phone for the text message for the MFA code. I think part of the reason so many people are salty about this stuff is that they haven't been adequately communicated and told why this stuff matters. You know, a password is inherently insecure, they're very crackable, we need to have security in layers. And you're accessing this data, and this data is important to us, and therefore we need to have an extra layer of security. And I empathize with the fact that this stuff is annoying, but we're doing it for a good reason. And when you do those sorts of things, when you communicate with your stakeholders, they tend to buy into security, and then they tend to go along with it and get a little less annoyed. When people like me are mocking your security, you've done a bad job. Generally speaking, we recommend doing any kind of assessment both with people who are on the inside, the internal stakeholders who understand best what the goals of the organization are, the value of the assets they're trying to protect, the goal of the business, whatever, as well as outsiders who have an independent view and can say, well, based on everything you're telling me and all the information we have, this is what we recommend. And the thing is, when you take an approach to security where you assess and actually bring in experts, you have a much, much better outcome because the whole policy and the resources invested are based on reality and not based on artificial stuff like a list of things you could do or someone's opinion about what security should be. It should really just be based on outcomes and results. Effective security is also transparent. I really think, for the most part, I mean, you shouldn't give your vulnerability reports out on the web or anything like that. But for most things that we do, it is okay to communicate these things publicly. They are not secrets. It is not a secret to say we monitor our traffic on our website. It's not a secret to say we do penetration tests. That's fine. You can tell people that you do these things. When you do say these things, people tend to buy in a lot more. You tend to have better results. And by the way, you can scrutinize it and say, well, maybe this policy should adjust. You know, when you're communicating this stuff, you can actually get real feedback. So anyway, that's what I have today. You know, feel free if I'm happy to take questions, but don't hesitate to contact me. We spend a lot of time doing penetration tests of all sorts. I do a lot of white box application security assessments. We consult on security policies, workflows, etc. There's my email, bschmerler@isc.io. You can also check out our Ask an Expert page on the isc.io website. If you happen to be involved in the IoT Village or want to be involved in the IoT Village, you can contact me too. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Or talk to me right now. Or get a book from me. So that's it. Any questions? Happy to answer anything. Yes?
I have sort of a two-part question. After all the backlash, did the hotel release a statement or
No.
anything? Okay. And then the second part is, for the 2025 conference, did they offer a room block again, do you know?
They definitely offered a room block again. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend last year, so I didn't witness it for myself. But I don't think they did the searches again. But they did do the room block again. You know, the Hilton does like money, and they do like booking their rooms. And so they weren't going to turn anybody away. And so, yeah, they still had it. To be honest, if I was to speculate, and I'm not the person who designed the policy, when I say that this is performative, I really mean that they're trying to create value for their customer by pretending that they're doing security. And so it's not really about security, it's about showing off. And this guy, whoever wrote the letter, whoever created the policy, thought to themselves, not me, I didn't do it. They thought to themselves, if I do this thing, everyone's gonna think I'm such a great guy, I'm so good at security, and I'm really on top of stuff. And some people probably did think that. But people who know differently. Any other questions?
Thank you, Ben.
All right, thank you. And I got a few more copies of Hackable at the